Well, could you explain what means that dazzled by the light?
So PB says, I was dazzled by the light and I didn't know what was going on and I stayed in the dark. So we know that the higher self, the overself, is a being of light. We know that God is light. We know from physics that the universe, the primordial element of the universe is light. So in the deepest mystical experience, you have an experience of light. So PB had this experience, but he didn't understand it. He wasn't prepared for it.
His ego wasn't prepared, you say?
His ego was not able to absorb what he experienced. It's like when you wake up and you say, I know I had a dream, but what was it? I don't remember my dream. PB couldn't absorb this. So he had a glimpse, right? This is where Gran is saying, he writes what he experienced. He had a glimpse of the overself and he lost it. And the glimpse was temporary. So he says, I remember the first time I had this astonishing experience. I was fond of disappearing from London whenever the weather allowed and wandering along the River Thames. I lost the feeling that I was there at all. I seemed to dissolve and vanish from that place, but not from consciousness. Something was there, a presence, certainly not me, but I was fully aware of it. It seemed to be something of the highest importance, the only thing that mattered. After a few minutes, I came back, discovered myself in time and space again, but a great peace had touched me and a very benevolent feeling was still with me. So this is PB's glimpse. He probably had an experience of what we call nirvikalpa, where he went into the void. He was out of time and space. Then he woke up and came back into his body.
Yeah. And but that's something that give to him some impulse, correct?
Yes.
Like to go forward, because seems to me that after that he, practices more, give more emphasis in his practice.
This is what we'll see about PB. After every illumination, he fell into the darkness and he had to climb back up the mountain. So sometimes he got very depressed. He says his life was a mess. We'll see his own words. But as Gran said, his persistence and his diligence and his effort is remarkable. And that's an example for us. So he says more about this experience. In the beginning of the notebooks following reflections, he has a long essay on this experience. He says, at age 19, before I reached the threshold of manhood, listen to this, after 6 months of unwavering daily practice of meditation and 18 months of burning aspiration for the spiritual self.
2 years.
So could we say that about ourselves?
Exactly 2 years, correct?
I underwent a series of mystical ecstasies. During them, I attained a kind of elementary consciousness of it. If anyone could imagine a consciousness which does not objectify anything but remains in its own native purity, a happiness beyond which it is impossible to go, and a self which is unvaryingly one and the same, she would have the correct idea of the overself. So PB is using the term overself later when he writes about this. He didn't have that terminology then, but he's saying, like we're looking at each other now through the YouTube, there's a consciousness and there's an object. In this state, there's only pure consciousness. There's no object. He says a consciousness which does not objectify anything. Now he goes down. The glamour and freshness of those mystical ecstasies subsided within 3 or 4 weeks and vanished. So is that what we call a glimpse?
Yeah, a glimpse. Glimpse, it doesn't stay, correct?
It's intermittent. But the awareness kindled by them remained for 3 years. I then met an advanced mystic. We'll talk about this person later, Brother M, an expatriate American living in Europe who told me that I was near the point where I could advance to the next stage and higher degree of illumination, and that at such a period, most aspirants undergo certain tests before they succeed in gaining the degree.
What do you think? Test is always there, correct?
Chigurino says every test is a blessing, but this test didn't feel like a blessing because PB failed the test. He says he was right. By the way, this is the goal. This is the job of the teacher. The teacher is an advanced being who could foresee your development. So Brother M said, you're going to go through this. You're ready to go the next step, but you're going to be tested.
Seems to be the test coming only when you are a good student.
Well, there's all kinds of tests, but this test, you have to go a certain... He says he was right. I underwent the test very soon and failed in them. Failed so miserably that I felt headlong down and lost even the spiritual consciousness I'd previously possessed. The period which followed was a terrible one, a veritable dark night of the soul through which I had to struggle slowly and painfully for another 3 years. During that period, there was neither time nor capacity to practice meditation, nor was I inclined to sustain aspiration. So it's like PB almost went off the path. He like tumbled off the highway and he was in the dark and he was miserable, right? He says, terrible dark night of the soul.
And then he thought he will have thoughts about taking his life.
Right. So there's a YouTube about PB contemplating suicide. PB actually thought, why should I still live? And he contemplated suicide, and then being the researcher he was, he researched about suicide, and he realized, I'm not going to die anyway, so I might as well not do it.
Then that was like when he really decided to be a seeker.
He kept going. To me, this persistence and devotion to PB to the path is remarkable. So he wrote a friend. It was actually, we'll talk about Michael Just. Michael Just was his roommate. They were both students of Brother M, and he wrote, all the world seems so futile today. I do not know what awaits us tomorrow. I do not understand life as clearly as I did 10 years ago when I had my neat parcel of theosophic theories to explain everything. Now I am too pessimistic about everything. So, right, we can relate to that. You just get really down in the dumps and you don't have any hope.
That is why PB could be a good example for us, because with all his struggles, he went, as Micha-El said, go up and down, and he never desist. And then he overcome his difficulties and became a philosopher. Then that is why he could be a good example for us.
But he really had to drag himself through what he later called the long path, which we'll talk about. So continuing, this is a long essay. We're only reading parts of it. This transition period was succeeded by another one when I acted more resolutely and worked more diligently. I laid down a program for regular daily meditation, practiced even more intensively, and tried harder to improve myself than I had done for years.
That was an important moment, correct?
PB realized, I need to get my act together spiritually and become worthy of these experiences that I had. 6 weeks later, I found myself plunged for 2 hours one evening in the deepest mental withdrawalness for me at the time. So this is his second initiation. I had felt that I had come home after an all too long and dishonorable, imagine PB says about himself, dishonorable absence like a prodigal son. During that memorable session, I recovered once more the degree of consciousness which I had enjoyed in the earlier period of my quest, although there was more knowledge and understanding this time. This is hugely important. You need to understand what you're going through. You need to have a map. The map doesn't get you where you're going, but if you have the map, when you get to where you're going, you know you're there. PB gave us the map. PB didn't have them.
And by his mistakes, correct? He learned, he improved, he decided to practice more. And then that also is important because after that he seems that he has more initiations, correct?
Many
more visions.
He'll
What
tell,
he
tell us more, but
he had after that.
let's first say more about this experience. He says, suddenly I saw a vision in which a duplicate of myself was pushing a huge boulder away from the entrance to a cave. I knew instinctively that the boulder was a symbol for the lower self and that the cave was a symbol for the higher self. So PB has what we call a vision. I stood at the entrance of the cave and I looked inside. I found it to be full of light, dazzlingly brilliant by comparison with the murky gloom outside. It kind of reminds us of Plato's cave. The power to enter, well, it's a different cave because it's a cave full of light, not darkness. The power to enter the cave was not given to me, only to stand at the entrance and gaze inside. I understood that the inner work necessary to gain this power would constitute the next cycle of my labors. So it's like you go to elementary school and then you pass the test and then you go to junior high and then you pass the test and you keep going. And PB says, I wasn't there. But look at how many teachers have an experience like this and they think they're enlightened and they talk about it and the other people think they're enlightened and they're only partway there. So somehow PB knew each one of these experiences, he knew he wasn't finished.
And how did he call these initiations? Like,
oh, so yes, so let's read the next. It ought now to be made clear that these two initiations were mystical and not philosophic. They enabled one to see the inner meaning of their own life, but not of all life. They concerned the I, and they gave knowledge of the true self. They did not concern the universe and the human relation to it. These subjects belong to the field of a philosophic initiation, which came much later and was my fourth in line. He didn't tell us what was the third. That was an event which interpreted all other events while still including the mystical initiation. There was blended into it the fuller perception of a cosmic knowledge. So this actually illustrates the mystical initiation gives you a realization of your own soul. And when he went to Ramana, he also had these experiences. Ramana was a portal, a great light, a master who gave him the opportunity to have these mystical illuminations again. But it didn't give him a deeper understanding of the universe. So he calls that a philosophic initiation. It's like you look under the hood of your car and you see how everything works. You look under the hood of the universe, or what Krishna gave to Arjuna, the cosmic vision, and you see how the cosmos works. So PB says that's a philosophic initiation that came much later in his life.
But also PB had some phase that was the occult, like, correct teachings.
Yes, so PB...
He went to occultism, like he explored so many, these dimensions. What do you have to say about that?
So let's say, what does PB have to say about it? Because PB's written about this. We're reading a lot of PB today. But since we're talking about PB, it's better to have PB tell his own story in his own words. But we know, as Gran is implying, these initial initiations also gave him psychic powers that were very tempting. And this is well-known test along the path that when you advance a certain amount, you get certain occult powers. And it's very hard to give them up, but if you don't give them up, you can't progress. So we'll see, this is what happened to PB. With the increasingly sensitive awareness induced by meditation, there developed a psychic weakness which troubled me. It was a knowing of other people's mental attitudes and emotional states, their personal characters and inner conditions. I read each person's mind as easily as if it were an extension of my own. Owing to my inexperience, ignorance, and unfamiliarity, I did not know how to bring this excessive empathy under control. I was too easily drawn out of myself, out of my ego center, into that of the person I happened to be with at the time. This weakened or even dispersed my concentration on the overself and made me too subject to the influence of others. Listen to this. The result was chaos and confusion. So much for occult powers. It was a long time before I was able to get rid of this unwanted faculty and clear up this undesirable condition. Then followed an interval of some years when the dark night settled over me.
Seems to me that now again came this dark night.
It might be the same one as he said before, but he had it more than one. I did not know how to stop losing myself in the process of absorbing the other person into my own entity so that they became a part of it, too often an incongruous part. What they thought or felt was reflected in my own mind consciousness like an image in a mirror. This faculty brought many unpleasant registrations to my mind and began to make life intolerable. Not until sometime later, when I had enough of it, I was warned that I need not affect harmony with others on the plane of the ego. Help was given to me for the cure of this condition, but I, on my part, had to make a positive exercise of the will for many months and a definite withdrawal of attention from others as well. Gradually, these phenomena disappeared until I became quite free of them. So here's another important point PB makes over and over. He had grace. He received help to cure the problem, but he had to do the work himself. He said, for many months, I had to really work to get free of these powers.